We're going to talk about one of the most misunderstood medical conditions on the programme now. We're talking about ME, which is something that, affects an awful lot of people. And at one point, it was making the newspaper headlines, wasn't it? Referred to as yuppie flu sometimes. Do you remember that? One of the headlines. And many people claimed it just didn't really exist. Well, things have moved on a lot. In Lincoln this week, there's a special showing of a documentary film and a chance to ask questions about the condition to one of the country's top experts. Let's have a listen to this.
I don't know what I did to myself. I don't think I can get up off the couch. I feel like my brain is misfiring.
Sometimes I wouldn't be able to speak.
If you say too little, they can't help you. And if you say too much, they think you're a mental patient.
The doctor would tell me, you're just dehydrated. Everyone gets stressed.
Now, that's from the film Unrest. It follows the real-life story of a woman with her battle with ME. Julia Knight is one of the organisers of the event. Now, she suffered with ME herself, and in a moment we're going to be chatting with Dr. Charles Shepherd, who's a medical advisor to the ME Association. But Julia, first of all, when did your ME begin? When did it start?
Well, I was a perfectly healthy, quite senior paediatric nurse in Lincolnshire, and it just came out of the blue in October 1999 for no obvious reason at all. Within 2 or 3 weeks, I was unable to get out of bed. I couldn't feed myself. I couldn't swallow at times. I couldn't speak at times. It was the most horrific thing that could have happened.
Let me pick up on a couple of bits then. So you couldn't get out of bed, or you didn't want to get out of bed. How were you feeling? What was going through?
It was as if everything had switched off. I wasn't able to, I just wasn't able to do life. I would try to get out of bed, nothing worked. And then the next day, I would be able to get out of bed. The next day, I couldn't swallow any food, and that went on for quite a time. My voice disappeared. It was like being in a nightmare. And particularly coming from a medical background, when nobody could help me, it became even more horrific, because I went from being a very well-respected colleague to some sort of person making symptoms up. It was the most frightening time of my life, and I'm not afraid to say out loud that I tried to take my life at one point.
Did you go to your GP in the early stages of this? And if you did, what reaction did you get?
Well, I had a couple of strange collapses at work a few weeks before this happened. And the GPs were mystified because I worked for Lincolnshire hospitals. Various consultants tried to help me. I had all sorts of maybe diagnoses, maybe you've got this, maybe you've got that. Everything came back negative.
And was this at the time that it was being referred to as this yuppie flu, as I said in the introduction? Was it around that time?
That was probably mid-80s. This was sort of late 90s. So we'd sort of moved on from that. But I still had people saying to me, in fact, I'll quote one GP who said to me when I was in bed, some people use this illness, to just hide from life. I had no reason to hide from life. I was a highly qualified paediatric nurse. I just helped set up the first community children's nursing service in Lincolnshire. I was just about to start my master's degree at Nottingham University. I had a happy life, children. Why would I need to hide from life? I physically could not just do life. I couldn't. It was horrific.
Let me bring in Dr. Charles Shepherd, who is an advisor to the ME Association. Dr. Shepherd, good morning.
Good morning, Melvin.
I mean, hearing what's happened here to Julia seemed to happen all of a sudden. Is that quite common, that you could literally go to bed, wake up totally different the next day?
Well, the symptoms Julia described are very much at the severe end of the spectrum of this illness, and 25% of people with ME are severely affected. They're housebound, bedbound, wheelchair-bound. They may even have to be tube-fed due to the swallowing difficulties that some people have. But it's probably more helpful to your listeners if I sort of go through what's perhaps the more typical presentation of this illness. And it normally affects previously fit young people, just like Julia, often starts in 20s, 30s, 40s. Children and adolescents can be affected as well. It is incidentally the commonest cause of long-term sickness, absence from school. But what normally happens is that they will predate the onset of their ME to a very acute episode. It normally involves an infection. Sometimes it involves a vaccination. But they'll get an infection. It may be just a flu-like illness. It may be something rather more specific, like glandular fever or chickenpox. And although the infection itself goes away, they are left feeling, to use the best wording I can use to describe this, just completely knackered afterwards. This is a physical and a mental fatigue. So that they have, because of the name that we use for this illness, myalgic encephalomyelitis, they have these muscle and brain symptoms. Muscle is myalgic, encephalomyelitis means brain. And they have this triad of symptoms. They have muscle symptoms. In particular, it's an exercise-induced muscle fatigue, often accompanied by pain. It's not a feeling tired all the time. They have these brain symptoms, which are problems with memory, concentration, attention span, problems with balance, problems with temperature control, and problems with a part of the nervous system called the autonomic nervous system, which controls heart and blood pressure, which is maybe why some people feel faint with this. And then on top of this, they just feel, if you like, infective. They just feel as though they've got an ongoing dose of flu with flu-like symptoms, sore throats and glands. And it's that combination of these very characteristic symptoms following an infection in a previously fit person and excluding other causes of these sort of symptoms, which may be other infections, it may be something like MS, which leads you to, as a doctor, hopefully, to think that this is ME and making that diagnosis and then advising on appropriate forms of management.
And Julia mentioned in her introduction, she mentioned, not able to get up. So again, there's an element there of the brain telling you things and your muscles not wanting to do anything and feeling just so tired that you can't do anything at all.
Yes, I mean, as I say, the symptoms Julia described are clearly at the severe end of the spectrum, and she was very severely affected right at the very onset of this, illness. I don't know whether it started with an infection. She didn't mention whether there was any.
Well, let me just ask her: did it start with an infection or something early on that you can recognise at all?
No, nothing at all. The only thing I can link it to, but I can't prove that medically, is I was on a holiday a few months before and I did get bitten by a tick. So my illness could have been caused by untreated tick-borne illness, but I went on to develop severe ME.
Interesting. And I've also, I don't know whether I'm right in saying this, Dr. Shepherd, can stress bring on something like this as well?
I wouldn't say stress can bring it on, but what we are saying, because of the infective onset to this, that some form of stress on the immune system, which is what an infection is. Sometimes we see people following an immunization. So stress in that respect can be a factor in triggering the illness at the very start.
You very kindly offered to do a Q&A session at the end of the showing of the film. Let's talk a bit about the film first of all. Do you think this has really helped a lot of people understand what ME is all about?
Well, I think it's having a widespread effect is the film. I've been involved with the film right from the very start, and we've had showings of it in medical schools, public showings. We had a showing at the House of Parliament in October where we had 50 MPs came to see it. We've shown it at the Royal Society, which is the prime academic institution in this country. So it's creating a lot of interest amongst a wide variety of people, not just people with this illness. And what we are hoping to get out of this is that it's going to draw attention, one, to the need for much more medical education on this illness so that we can get doctors to make an early and accurate diagnosis and then give people proper management of the illness. That it's going to stimulate some real research into the biomedical side of this illness, which has been sadly neglected for many years and has largely been funded by the charity sector. And it's also going to help people because there's a postcode lottery, as in we're not unique here, but there is a real postcode lottery in relation to NHS services for these people with this illness. I'm not quite sure of the situation in Lincolnshire, but we've got many parts of the country where there are no hospital-based specialist services, where GPs, who are often having difficulty with both making a diagnosis and providing accurate forms of management, can refer these patients to. So we're trying to get a lot out of this film. It's had a lot of media publicity. It's great you're giving it some media publicity as well. It's getting through to the politicians. It's getting through to the civil servants. It's getting through to people at the Department of Health. And so hopefully it's going to have a real beneficial effect for people with this condition.
Dr. Charles Shepherd, thank you for that. Julia, stay with me. We'll talk some more in just a moment. We've been talking about ME and a special showing of a film this Thursday at the Odeon in Lincoln. The film is called Unrest, follows the real-life story of a woman who's battled with ME. Julia Knight is with me, one of the organisers of the film showing. You had ME, back in 1999, were you saying?
That's when the illness started. I still have it. I've made lots of progress, but I still have limitations that are not obvious, probably, if you just look at me. I have lots of cognitive issues. I still can't read a book. I can read, but only for a couple of minutes.
Are some days better than others for you?
Yeah, it's a fluctuating illness.
Is today a good day?
It was a bit wobbly this morning, but I just went for it anyway.
And you've done it. It really has had a knock-on effect in your life, hasn't it, in more ways than one? Absolutely.
My illness started in 1999. By 2003, my marriage had broken up. We had to sell the house. I'd obviously lost my career, which the NHS had paid a lot of money to educate me as I was at master's level. But I have been able to rebuild my life, and I have moved forward, but it's taken much effort. And I'm, the last few years, I'm determined that whatever symptoms I have, which can be really horrible, I'm going to live my life anyway.
And is part of the problem, when you talk about any form of whatever illness, mental illness, whatever, because you can't physically see anything, that makes it even more difficult for people to understand what you're going through? Absolutely.
An example of this is my walking was very poor. It's only in the last 3 years that I've been able to sort of walk around a shop or walk around a bit of the town centre. I did have a blue badge for a few years, which I haven't got now. But I did have a couple of comments once when I parked my car. Why have you got a blue badge?
And that's hurtful, isn't it?
That was very upsetting, yeah.
Because it's knowing how to respond to that. I've got a comment that's come in here from Marion in Boston. Let me just share this with you. I've had severe ME for 7 years. It came on very quickly at one of the happiest times in my life. I was told it was caused by a complete breakdown because of my mind relaxing and letting all the bad stuff out that's happened in my life. I was bedridden for 2 years. I still have to use a wheelchair and mobility scooter. Some days, even now, I can't even get up to make a cup of tea. It was a very frightening illness. My husband had to give up work to be my carer. I need to say, too, that many doctors and nurses are totally ignorant of the severe impact mentally and physically of ME. They all need training as to how to deal with ME patients. You were nodding while I was reading that. You were hearing some similarities in there, not from just yourself, but other people you've spoken to as well.
Yeah, I mean, I've lost count of the people I've come into contact with over the years. Some complete horror stories that you wouldn't believe unless you'd been through it yourself, and you know that it does happen.
I've got a caller we're going to go to in just a second. Kirsty, I think it is. If you pop your headphones on. Hello, Kirsty.
Hello, good morning.
Good morning. What's your ME story, Kirsty?
Well, I first got ill when I was 13, which of course can be very confusing for a teenager who normally doesn't want to get out of bed anyway. But I got very ill with glandular fever, and from that point on, I just seemed to be picking up every virus. So sort of by the time I would get over one, I'd be getting another one. So I ended up missing half of my schooling. But unfortunately, at that time, there wasn't really much education about it. And so for 2 years, my GP was just convinced that I had depression, which I didn't. And at a young age, they put me on antidepressants. So it took 2 years for me to finally see a paediatrician and get the diagnosis. But even then, there's very much conflicting advice onto how to manage it. And again, it's great that awareness is being raised by this film. But certainly in the medical profession, I think some of their practices are quite outdated. So I think, thankfully, thanks to support groups and stuff like that and research from the charities, then we are a little bit more savvy on how to manage the condition. But it's very much a personal thing.
I think an interesting point I pick up, Kirsty, is when you said, as a 13-year-old, as a teenager, not wanting to get out of bed, everybody would say, well, that's fair enough, she's a teenager. But actually there was more to it than that, wasn't there?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I was a very good student, and it was very out of character for me, but obviously without any other evidence, then the teachers had to jump to the conclusions that I just wasn't wanting to come to school, and there wasn't really any support put in place. Whereas now, I think if you get that diagnosis early on, then schools are quite good at providing that extra support. And because I would get home from school and I would collapse on the sofa and then just sleep the rest of the night until it was time for school in the morning.
And that was your life?
And that was my life. And so really, I missed out on the usual social activities that are, teenagers hanging out with their friends and doing social activities. I missed out on all of that because I slept my way through my life. Do you think you still have ME now, Kirsty? Yes, I do, and I also have fibromyalgia, which there are lots of sort of overlapping links there. And how do you manage your ME and fibromyalgia? Well, I can't work even properly part-time. I do run my own business, but I only have to work 2 hours a week, and the rest of it I can do administration at home, fitting it in with how I'm feeling. But I would say I tend to work in 3 to 4 hour blocks, and after that time I really need to have a sleep. But the trouble with ME is you can't really fully recharge your battery, so you can sleep 18 hours, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to have the energy that people expect you to have, because even after all of that time, after a few hours, you're going to be needing to rest again. Kirsty, it's really interesting hearing your side, and Julia in the studio nodding away with that, hearing these similar stories. The film itself, it follows a true story, doesn't it? Yes, it follows the story of a lady called Jennifer Bree, who was a PhD student at Harvard, and whose life, just like mine, fell to bits overnight, and she just couldn't imagine why this had happened to her. She visited many doctors. She was told the illness was caused by a trauma that she'd hidden in her childhood, various other things that people will see on the film, much like some of the things that I was told. She was depressed. Well, you would be depressed if you couldn't move, or you couldn't, you've lost your job and you've lost everything in life. But that comes after, not before the illness. If people want to come and see the film, because you have to book it through a particular way, which will leave the details on reception, 6 o'clock on Thursday. Yeah. But as well as seeing the film, there's a Q&A afterwards with the doctor that we were talking to earlier. Yeah. How useful do you think that's going to be for people? Well, I think just particularly for local sufferers, to have the opportunity of asking questions from somebody like Dr. Shepherd, who's, we've all read his book, probably, Living with ME, just to be able to speak face-to-face with somebody of that level. And Dr. Shepherd is an ME sufferer himself, so he's been through it. The only drawback is that we've got quite a short time slot at the Odeon, so the Q&A will probably only have 30 minutes, but we'll just try and cram in as many questions as you can. So 6 o'clock on Thursday for the film. www.ourscreen.com, screenings/45659.
far too quick for you to write that down. I will leave all the contact details on reception, but there are self-help groups and organisations in the county as well, aren't there?
Yeah, I'm talking today on behalf of the Lincolnshire ME Friendship Group, which I only got involved with last year because I've been living overseas with my husband for a couple of years, so been out of Lincoln. I became aware that they were trying to get a screening shown in Lincoln, and from my background, I've been able to have certain skills, so I sort of joined in with them and now part of the group. So myself, Sue Davidson and Jonathan Fitzgerald, so just the three of us, have been battling to get this screened for the other sufferers in the area. We've worked really hard considering our limitations, but we've done it. And come what may Thursday, we've actually done it.
You've done it. It's a great achievement. Well done to you and the others as well. We are going to put a link on our website, on our programme website, bbc.co.uk/Radio Lincolnshire. You'll click on Melvin in the Morning and you'll find that link there. We'll get that all set up for you. And the screening on Thursday and the question and answer session afterwards. Thank you very much indeed.